Peter doesn't seem to care much about his appearance or weight, probably because he thinks taking care of those things must be very complicated. However, there's an episode where Peter finds a quick, practical, and effortless way to get in shape. But since we're talking about Peter, things obviously end up going terribly wrong for him. Are you curious? Then stick around until the end, and I'll tell you everything that happened when Peter decided to become sexy. But before that, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel to keep receiving videos like this. When Brian decides to try a more natural alternative to get rid of fleas, things don't go well, and the Griffin's house ends up completely infested with them. As a result, they are forced to call an exterminator to solve the problem. However, the company they hire is very strange, and the employees try to kill the fleas using guns, grenades, and clubs. After destroying the entire house, they almost get killed by the fleas themselves. Feeling guilty about all the destruction, Brian decides to pay for the family to stay at a hotel until the house is repaired. And since they had to stay there for a while, the family decides to treat the situation as a vacation and have a good time at the hotel pool. However, while everyone is having fun, Chris feels very embarrassed to take off his shirt because earlier, when he had gone to the market, a crazy security guard thought he was stealing ham and started searching him in a very strange way. However, Chris wasn't stealing anything. The suspicious bulges the guard thought he had in his clothes were just his own body fat. Because of this, the boy started feeling very uncomfortable with his own weight. Seeing their son's strange behavior, Peter and Lois became very worried, and Lois even tried to reassure him, saying that nobody saw him as fat. However, a random guy appears and makes things even worse. "Sorry, sir, you can't park here." "Oh, wait, that's not a van, it's just a fat kid." Seeing that nothing was cheering up their son, Lois told him that if he really wanted to lose weight, she would put him on a diet and Peter would help him exercise. This idea really excites Chris, but then Meg, the know-it-all, chimes in, saying that if he wanted to lose weight, he should do what supermodels do: stick a finger down his throat and throw up until he's thin. But being the good father he is, Peter tells Chris not to listen to his sister because sticking a finger down his throat wouldn't make him vomit. And of course, he decides to test it himself to prove he's right, only to regret it immediately. Finally, they return home, and Peter keeps his promise, actually helping Chris with his diet. Peter also takes him to the gym for some exercise. However, Chris refuses to run on the treadmill because, according to him, every time he runs, his thighs slap together, making a noise that hurts his ears. But being a good trainer, Peter finds a way to motivate Chris by holding a chocolate bar in front of him. After that, they go to the park, where Peter has Chris do some pull-up exercises and even comes up with a clever way to keep him motivated. Then, Peter takes Chris to a river so he can swim a bit. But a hungry bear shows up, mistakes him for a fish, and almost eats him. Apparently, this crazy training lasted a week, and after that, Peter decided to weigh Chris to see how many pounds he had lost. But to their surprise, the boy had actually gained more weight. Investigating what had happened, they discovered that somehow the chocolate had gotten stuck in the folds of Chris's belly fat. That night at the bar, Peter vents his frustration to Cleveland, telling him he no longer knew what to do because no matter how much exercise Chris did, he just couldn't lose weight. After hearing the whole story, Cleveland suggests that if they wanted quick results, Chris should undergo liposuction. To perform the procedure, Cleveland even recommends his brother Broderick, who, according to him, is an excellent professional. The next day, Peter takes Chris to a consultation with Cleveland's brother, but after hearing how the whole procedure works, Chris doesn't think it's a good idea and decides to continue with his diet and exercise. However, seeing an opportunity to lose weight without making any effort, Peter undergoes liposuction instead of his son, removing 70 kilos of fat, which leaves him incredibly thin. Lois doesn't like this decision at all because she thinks it's not a natural process and could harm Peter. Meanwhile, seeing that Chris is on a diet, Meg starts eating a lot to tempt him, but things get out of control, and Chris starts gaining so much weight that he ends up looking like a giant ball. While Chris remains motivated and focused on his training, Peter, now thin, is enjoying his new body, doing things he never could when he was fat, like riding Brian like a horse or finally being able to see his own feet. Excited about his transformation, Peter realizes he can surgically change all the things he doesn't like about himself. So, he returns to Broderick's clinic and undergoes multiple plastic surgeries to make himself as handsome as possible, and it works perfectly. Peter ends up looking like a completely different person. At first, Lois is furious about Peter's crazy decisions, but after seeing how handsome he has become, she just ditches the kids and jumps on him. Thanks to his new appearance, Peter discovers that people will do anything for a good-looking person. After getting priority in the supermarket line, he even gets invited to join Quahog's Beautiful People Club. However, joining this club makes Peter very eccentric, and he even alters his wedding photo. Later, Lois reminds Peter that he has completely forgotten his promise to help Chris, and the old tactics no longer work because now the boy has found a way to sneak chocolate. So, Peter decides to take Chris to the Beautiful People's Club to motivate him, but they don't let the boy in because he's too fat. Peter ends up agreeing with them and sends Chris home, which only makes his self-esteem even worse. He starts hating himself for being overweight. However, seeing her brother's sadness, Meg approaches him and tells him how much she thinks he's lost weight, which actually cheers him up. "Thanks, Meg. I envy you the most for your mustache." "I don't have a mustache," Meg says. After how Peter treated his son at the club, Lois gets furious with him. After a heated argument, Peter decides to go for a drive to calm down. However, his vanity is so extreme that he gets distracted by his own reflection in the rearview mirror and ends up crashing into a tree, flying off a cliff, hitting an airplane, and then falling into a vat at a grease factory. After that, Peter is badly injured and has to undergo several procedures to stay alive, which ultimately bring him back to his original form. When he wakes up and sees his entire family by his side, he feels very emotional because despite how he treated them, they all stayed with him when he needed them the most. And that was the time Peter tried to become sexy. Let me know your thoughts on this whole craziness in the comments. Thanks, and see you next time.